Masechet Baba Batra Daf Zayin. We're talking about property rights and privacy rights when it comes to neighbors and partners. So here's a new case. Hanhu be'tere dahavu dayiri. Chad hava dayir ilai v'chad hava dayir tatai. There are two people that are living in the same building complex. One lives on the upper floor and one lives on the lower ground floor. Itebar tatai. And then the ground floor is collapsing. In other words, the walls of the ground floor are sinking down into the ground such that the ceiling of the first floor is getting lower and lower and more difficult to live in it. Amar le tatai le'ilai tav nibneyeh. So the owner of the lower tells the owner of the upper, hey, let's rebuild this house. Look, it's sinking into the ground, and look, my ceiling is so low. Let's rebuild the house. Amar le ana shapir kadaina. The upper guy says, nothing wrong for me. I'm living in the upper one. I go up the stairs, up the ladder. I'm totally fine. My house is perfectly good. Why should I have to pay for any expense for your house? Your apartment is sinking. That's your problem. Amar le istere ana ve'ebneyeh. So lower guy says, okay, fine. I have a problem. So you know what? I'll take all the expense. I will demolish the entire building and I will rebuild it at my expense, and I'll rebuild your apartment. That way I can have an apartment that I can live in. Amar let li duchtali medarba. And the upper guy can say, well, where am I going to live in the meantime? How it's going to take you 6 months to rebuild? I don't have another house to live in. I'm living here. Amar le ana ogar lach duchta. So the lower one says, I will rent you another home in the meantime while I rebuild our house over here. Amar le la tarachna. The upper guy says, I don't want to bother. I have to move all my furniture. I have to move my stuff. I have to come and go. I'm happy where I am, and my house, my apartment is totally good. Not my problem. I don't want to bother moving, even if you pay for rent and for all of the building expenses. La ka mit dareli. The resident of the lower apartment can say, I can't live here. Why? What am I supposed to do? Shuf akresach ve'ul. Shuf akresach ufok. And the owner of the upper house says, go crawl on your stomach and crawl in, and crawl on your stomach and get out. So what? So you have a very short ceiling, right? What do you need to do? So you could go to sleep in there. Who says you have to walk around in your own home, standing up, right? You can crawl around. It's not my problem. I live upstairs. I'm very happy. I own this apartment upstairs, and I don't want to move. I don't want, even if you pay for everything, I don't want to bother. So who has the right claim here? Amar Rav Chama bedina kame'akeh. Rav Chama is a 5th generation Babylonian Amora from the city yeshiva of Nehar De'ah. And Rav Chama rules that the upper story guy has the right to prevent the lower story from knocking down the house. So I'm here, I have my house, I'm perfectly fine. You cannot make me move, you cannot bother me to rebuild. And the upper story guy has the right to prevent the lower story only if the beams that are between their floors are not less than 10 tefachim from the floor. As long as the first floor guy has at least 10 tefachim of height. So the upper story guy says, look, you have 10 tefachim. I'm not encroaching on you. You have your own domain. So you have to crawl around at home. Not my problem. However, once the upper story floor goes below 10 tefachim, 10 tefachim is the domain of the lower story guy. Throughout halacha, 10 tefachim is the measure of height that separates two domains, right, for all things. That's why partitions have to be 10 tefachim high for the laws of Eruv, for Sukkah, and for many other things. So once it gets lower than 10 tefachim, then the lower guy says, hey, what do you do? Why are your beams in my house? You're living in my domain now, and that's not allowed. Get out of my domain. And the upper story guy says, well, what should I do? It fell down. Oh, okay, then we have to rebuild together. And then the lower guy can force the upper guy to move out, and they will rebuild it together. Okay. And all this is only if they did not make a condition at first, when they first moved into this 2-story home, they did not make any condition, then the upper story guy can say, I'm totally fine all the way until it gets down to 10 tefachim or less. However, if they made a stipulation and the lower guy says, listen, if the homes tend to settle and sink over time, if once my home starts sinking, then I'm going to rebuild and you can't stop me. If they make a condition like that, then yes, and the lower guy can say, get out, I'm going to rebuild. Now, even if they do make a condition, what's the amount that it has to go down? Even if it goes down 1 millimeter, he could say, I want to rebuild and kick the top guy out while he rebuilds. No, it has to be some minimum that is now called, this is sinking, and it would be annoying for the lower guy to live with a short ceiling. So how much is that? Amru Rabbanan kamed Rabba mishme de mor zutra bere de Rav Nachman. So the rabbi said in front of Rabbah, in the name of Mozutra, the son of Rav Nachman. Damar mishmed Rav Nachman, and he said it in the name of his father, Rav Nachman. So all this is related in the name of Rav Nachman. Nachman said it's according to what we learned in the Mishnah later on, that a height, if you have if you're building a typical house for a person and you didn't stipulate the dimensions, then the height has to be half of the width plus half of the length. So if the room is going to be 6 by 10, so you take those two, you add them up, 16, take half of that, 8. That's how high the ceiling has to be, 8. And so if they built it, let's say it was 6 by 10, and they built it 9 feet high, good. And now it sinks down up to 8. Still, the upper guy can say, I'm not moving. You have 8 of height. That's still the appropriate dimension. If it goes lower than 8, then the lower guy can say, this is not proportional to my dimensions, and then I want to rebuild it. Amar lehu Rabba, lav amina lechu la titelu bebuke siriki berav Nachman. And Rabba said to the sages, didn't I already tell you not to hang empty pictures on Rav Nachman? In other words, you should not, this tradition that you're saying in the name of Rav Nachman is wrong, and you're attributing it to Rav Nachman. It's an empty pitcher. That's like when you're carrying bottles around your neck. It makes sense to carry if there's something in it, but you wouldn't carry things that are empty. And so you're taking these empty traditions and you're hanging them, giving the authority of Rav Nachman to them, but really Rav Nachman did not say anything like that. Rather, I'll tell you what Rav Nachman said. Hachi amar Rav Nachman, ki dedairi inashem. Rav Nachman said that the way people normally live. Go look, what's a typical ceiling height, right? 8 feet? Okay, then it should be 8 feet. Once it goes below that, then you change it. It doesn't matter what the dimensions are. You might have even if you have a small room or a big room, you still want the ceiling to be a height that you can walk around in comfortably, and you don't need it to be terribly high. So there's a standard amount. Go around and in that region, what's the standard ceiling height? Now, how much is that standard height? Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says it's enough to get a bundle of reeds of the type made in mehoza and spin around in the house. You have this big bundle of reeds, right? Can you spin around and not hit the ceiling? Then the ceiling is high enough. If you can't do it, then the ceiling is too low. Okay, so that's story number 1 about the upstairs and downstairs neighbors. And Rav Acha said that the upstairs neighbor can prevent the downstairs neighbor as long as it's those conditions that we mentioned. Now we have a similar story, and we're going to ask why we need both of these stories. You had someone who built a wall out in front of the window of his neighbor. You have 2 neighbors. One has a house with a window, and the other comes and builds a wall blocking the light that's going into the neighbor's window. And so the neighbor with the existing house says, you're darkening my house. You built a wall and you're blocking my window. So the guy who built the no house says, I'll tell you what, I want to leave my wall here. I'll seal up your window and I'll build you another window higher than my wall. And that way you'll get light and I'll pay for it. I'll take care of it. And the guy with the existing house says, now you're going to damage my wall. You're going to plaster up, make, if you have a hole, you have a window, plaster it up, make a hole in the wall above. That's going to weaken the wall. So the neighbor who builds the new house says, you know what? I will take down your wall all the way down to where the window is, and I'll build you an entirely new wall from there up, and it'll be all solid until higher, and I'll put the window higher, and that way you'll have half of a new wall, and you won't have to worry about that part of the wall being weakened. And the guy of the existing house says, no, but then I'm going to have an old wall on the bottom and a new wall on top, and that is not so stable. You want the whole wall to be built at the same time. Also, maybe it won't look nice, but more importantly, it's not structurally sound. So the guy who built the new house says, okay, I'll tear down the entire wall that's in front of my wall, and I will build you a new wall with a nice window on top, and you'll have plenty of light and a whole new wall. And the owner of the house that was there says, then I'm going to have one new wall and 3 old walls. It's not going to stand up well, right? The 3 old walls are already settled. You're going to build a new wall, and that's going to be settling. It's not going to be the same. Besides that, it's going to be a different color, and that won't match, but it's not going to stand and not be as stable as the old wall that's there now. And so the neighbor who just built his house said, I'll tell you what, I will demolish all the walls of your home, and I'll build you an entirely new home. Isn't that a good deal? What complaint can you have after that? And so the neighbor with the existing house says, well, I have nowhere else to live. Where am I going to live in the meantime while you knock down my house and rebuild it? And so the new neighbor says, I will rent you a home. And the guy of the old one says, oh, that's such a bother. I have to move out all my stuff. I have to forward my mail there, and I don't want to bother, and therefore nothing that you can do. You have to take down your wall that you just built, because I have a right for my light to come in as it was before. So who has the rightful claim? The case came to Rav Chama, Amar Rav Chama, the same sage as before, Bedin Kame'akev, and he said that the neighbor with the original house can prevent the new neighbor from building a wall in front of his window. And even though the new neighbor offers all kinds of things to build an entirely new house, that guy with the old house can say, I like it just the way it is, and I don't want to move out. I don't want to change anything. Okay, good. Now we ask, Rav Chama's 2 laws seem to be the same thing. The guy with the upper story and lower story, or the 2 neighbors with the window, it's the same principle in both cases. One guy wants to do something, but the other guy says, no, I'm perfectly fine. I don't want to move out. I don't want to change. And that person has the right to prevent the other one. So why is he teaching us both of these stories? Oh, he taught the second one to show that even if this house is not one that he lives in, it's only a storage house for straw and wood. And therefore, having a window there is not that important, really. It's really only a storage house. Okay, you may still want a window, because when you go in there, you want to be able to see. But if if the window is here or higher up, it's not a big deal. It's also not a big deal to move everything out, right? It takes 10 minutes. You take the straw, move it to somewhere else, and the other guy will take care of the movers too. And so it's not like the neighbor himself has to live somewhere else. So even in that case where it's not such a burden for the existing neighbor who has the current house to move or change the window or change the wall or whatever, still he has a right to say, I like my storage house just the way it is. I like the window where it is. I like all my walls just the way they are. I don't want to move out, and therefore he can prevent the new neighbor from building a wall in front of his storage house. Han hu betere ache te palge behade hadade chad matye aspelida vechad matye tarbisa. Okay, now a new story about two brothers. Their father had an estate. Their father died. They inherited it, and they split the parts of the estate. One of them took an aspelida. Aspelida is like a hall, or like a fancy a hall, or it seems to be like a portico. It's somewhat open to the air and gets a lot of light, but it's covered. So we'll call it the portico, the aspelida. One of the brothers took that, and the other brother took a garden, which is all open. Azalahu de matye tarbisa vekabane ashita pumade aspelida. Now they split the inheritance, and the one who had got the garden builds a wall in the garden, but right in front of the portico, blocking all the light that's coming into this nice portico hall. Amarle kama alaft alai. So the brother with the portico says, "You made my house dark." Amarle bedidi kabanina. And the one with the garden says, "I'm building on my property. I could do whatever I want in my garden." Amar Rav Chama bedin kaamarle. And Rav Chama says that the owner of the garden has a right to build. Right? He's doing it in his garden, so that's his right. That's Rav Chama's third opinion. Now, Rav Chama's ruling here seems to contradict his ruling in the previous case. In the previous case with the window, he said that the guy who comes and builds a wall does not have a right to block the light coming into his neighbor's window. And over here, he says that the guy who builds a wall in his garden has a right to leave that wall, even though it blocks the portico. So to explain this difference, it must be that in the previous case, the guy with the window had a chazakah already. He had a presumed right. This window was there for a long time, and he had the light coming in, and he has a right to it, and he can stop the neighbor from building a wall. Whereas here in this case, the owner of the portico, the brother with the portico, did not have such a right of a chazakah with that right, and that's why he rules in favor of the brother who owns the garden, who builds a wall. Okay, so we can resolve that contradiction, but now we're going to introduce another contradiction between this ruling and a baraita. Amar le Ravina le Rav Asher, ma'ishana mehadetanya, shnei achim shechalku, echad mehen natal sedeh cherem ve'echad mehen natal sedeh lavan. Yesh lo leba'al hakerem 4 amot b'sedeh lavan she'al ken halku. So the baraita teaches that two brothers who inherited an estate and split it, so that's the same. In that sense, it's the same as the previous case. And one of them took the vineyard, and one of them took the wheat field. Now, even though they're splitting it in that way, nevertheless, the owner of the vineyard has a right to 4 amot in the wheat field. He needs that for tools and animals in order to pull the plow and the tools. You need 4 amot around the vineyards in order to work the vineyards. And so that's built in, and that's on that condition that they divided the estate. Nobody would take a vineyard only without any extra 4 amot, because then he can't work the vineyard. And so that's built into the condition. So how come over here Rav Chama said that when they split it, the owner of the portico doesn't come with a right to light, right? How come we don't assume that it comes with a right for light to come in? But over here he says that the brother who takes the vineyard, we presumed, has a right to 4 amot. Just like you need 4 amot in order to work the vineyard, also you need light for the portico to be a portico. So why doesn't he say the same thing? Amar le hatam da'alu lehadadeh. So Rav Asher answered, in the case of the vineyard, they made an assessment with each other. How much is the vineyard worth? How much is the wheat field worth, right? And so we're going to split it evenly, but the vineyard is not worth much if you can't work it, if you don't have the extra 4 amot. Okay, I'll give you the 4 amot, you give me something else. And they worked it out, and that was built into the deal. So that's why over here he has a right to the 4 amot, because they assessed it. Okay, we say to that, we respond to that, Aval hachamai de la'alul hadadeh. What? And you think that in the case of the garden and the portico, you think that they did not make an assessment and see what is the value of it and what rights each person has? B'chi b'shuftane askinan tahai shakil aspelida v'hai shakil tarbisa v'la alul hadadeh. You think we're talking about foolish brothers, that one of them would take a portico, which is very valuable, valuable, and the other one would take a garden, which is not as valuable, and they wouldn't make an assessment to say, fine, you have a right to this, but you're going to give me that instead. Obviously, he made an assessment, and built in to the portico is the light that comes into it. That's what makes it a portico and nice to be in. No, surely we're not talking about fools, and they did make an assessment, but when they made the assessment, it was about the value of the bricks and the beams and the boards, because the guy with the portico has this nice big hall open portico, and we took that into account, and we compared that to the value of the other things that the other brother got, and they made a deal. But the value of the airspace of that light coming into the portico, that was not part of the assessment, and therefore the owner of the portico does not have a presumed right, chazakah, that he should have light coming in. So this is really helping also explain why Rav Chama would say over here the guy can build a wall. In the previous case with the window, he can't. The guy with the window had a chazakah, and here when two brothers split the inheritance, this was not built in to their agreement that the owner of the portico would have light coming in. Yeah, but the owner of the portico could make a claim and say, listen, initially I inherited a portico, and now you turned it into a storage room because you made it dark. I didn't inherit it as a storage room. I inherited it as a nice, beautiful, open air portico with lots of light. So now you're going back on the initial deal that we said. Amarav Shimi bar Asher Shema be'alma pelag le. And Rav Shimi bar Asher is going to once again support Rav Chama's ruling and say that he only inherited a name, a thing that's called a portico, but doesn't actually have to be a portico. It's just something that goes by the name portico, even if it's not. Right? You inherited the thing that everybody calls portico. It doesn't have to be a portico, and I can build a wall and block the light. Mila Tanya, and a proof for Rav Shimi bar Asher's ruling is from a Braita. Haomer bet kod afar ani mocher lecha af al pi she'eno ela letech higi'o shelo machar lo ela shema vehu demitkere bet kod. Someone says, I am selling you a bet kod of dirt, and he sells it to him. Now it turns out it's only half of that amount. It's only a letech. The sale is valid. Why? Because he only sold something that they call a bet kod. As long as it is in fact called a bet kod, people go by that name. Let's say it used to be a bet kod, and then someone they sold half of it, but they still call that area a bet kod, so the sale is still valid. Or similarly, if I sell you an orchard, even if there's no pomegranates growing there, the sale is valid because I just called you the area that's called an orchard. As long as that place is called an orchard, then the sale is valid. I was just using the name as a description of the air of the place, but not that it has to actually be an orchard. Or if I say I'm selling you a vineyard, even though there are no grapevines in there, the sale is valid because I'm just selling you the thing that is called a vineyard. Maybe once upon a time it was a vineyard. As long as right now it's called a vineyard, it doesn't actually have to be a vineyard. If I sell you the deal casino and you go in and you say, hey, there's no casino here, there's no gambling, so the sale is still valid because that's what people call it, even though there hasn't been gambling there for decades and decades. Nevertheless, since people call it that, the sale is valid. And here too, people call this the portico. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed that it's always going to have light coming in. You just get this area that's called a portico. And now we reject this and say, mi dameh, wait, these two cases are not the same. Hata maseh amar le mochel lokeach, shema ze binilach, hacha maseh amar le adata dehachi palgi, dedair nabe ki hechi dedaru abahatan. In the case of the orchard and the vineyard, the seller can say to the buyer, I sold you the area that's called an orchard or called a vineyard, and even if it's not actually an orchard vineyard, the sale is valid because I'm just using the name as a description of the place, not of what it actually is. But here, in the case of the two brothers who inherit, the brother who inherits the portico can say, it's on condition that I'm going to use this the same way our father lived here. Right? When our father was alive and was here, he used the garden as a garden and used the portico as a portico, and he enjoyed the light that came in. And so when he died and we split it, my assumption was that I get the portico as a portico and get to use it the same way our father used it. And therefore, I do have a chazakah of allowing light to come in, and you cannot build a wall here. This would be a challenge against Rav Hama. Amrule mor yenuka umor kashisha bered Rav Chisda Rav Ashe nahar de'eh leta'amayhu. And so mor yenuka and mor kashisha, the sons of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashe, we have an answer. The sages from Nehar De'ah are consistent in their opinion. Rav Hama was a 5th generation Amorah from Nehar De'ah, and Shemuel was a 1st generation Amorah from Nehar De'ah, but they're still both from Nehar De'ah, even though they never met each other. And he said, Rav Hama's ruling can be explained by an earlier ruling, also from Nehar De'ah, De'amar Rav Nachman Amar Shemuel, Ha'achin shechalku en lahem lo derech ze al ze, velo chalonot ze al ze, velo sulamot ze al ze, velo amat hamayim ze al ze, v'hizaharu bahen shalachot kevuot hem. So Shemuel says that if two brothers inherit a property and split it, they cannot assume a path from one to another. In other words, let's say you have a large field. When the father was alive, he would go from one field into the other and pass through the other field into one. But now, when they split it, that right to trespass they don't inherit it. And now each brother can say, listen, I know our father, he used to walk through that side of the land to get to this side, but now you inherited that side, I inherit this side. I don't want you walking through my land to get to your side, right? And so the rights are not inherited. Neither are windows. If when the father was alive, he had a couple of houses and he had windows with light. And now the brothers inherit this land, and one inherits a house with windows. The other can build a wall right in front of it, because the right to light is not inherited by the kids, even though the father would have had a right to light, but he owns the whole thing. But the sons don't, and therefore one son could build a wall right in front of the wall of the other if it's on his property and the windows on the other guy's property. Or right to put a ladder up. When the father was alive, he'd put a ladder or a water channel. He'd put a water channel right through the property, or he'd put a ladder on one side of the property so that he can reach up to the other side of the property, because the father owned the whole thing together. But now that they split it, and now they're two separate owners, and they do not inherit the right to encroach upon the other for any of these matters. And these, he says, are established laws, so you should better be careful. That's what Shemuel said. And Rav Chama is following the same thing. One brother inherited the portico. He does not assume the rights to use the portico in the same way that the father did, with lots of lights coming in. He just gets this area with no other rights from that he can encroach on the other side and tell the other guy, the garden brother, you can't build a wall. So no, you don't inherit a right. The guy who built the garden wall tells the guy who has the portico, you don't inherit a right to light, and I can build a wall, and you cannot stop me. So you see that Rav Chama is consistent with Shemuel. Rava disagrees and says that the same way the father used his big property, the sons inherit those same rights, and one brother can trespass through the other, build a channel, put a window, put a wall in front of the window, put a ladder, and they do inherit those rights. And so Rava would say, in this case, that the brother who has a portico has a right to use it as a portico with lots of light coming in, just like the father used it, and the other brother who has the garden would not be able to build a wall. All right, so now we're going to have yet another ruling of Rav Chama. Hushetara diatmed nafik ale tabra. Amar Rav Chama agbuye lag magbinan le umikra la karinan le. You have a loan document that belongs to orphans. The father lent out money. He has an IOU that he can go and collect. Right? Maybe he tried to collect it when he was alive, but anyway, he died, and now the orphans inherited that loan document, and so they go and say, "Hey, look, you owed our father money, $1,000. Now you have to pay us $1,000." However, the borrower comes and produces a receipt and says, "Look, I have a receipt that I paid." So now what are we going to do? We have an IOU, which means that they can collect. We have a receipt that says you can't collect. So who do we trust? Rav Chama says, leave it status quo. We cannot make the borrower pay because he has a receipt. On the other hand, usually when you have a receipt, normally you take the IOU and return it or rip it up. And here, for some reason, the orphans still have it. So if you believe the receipt that he paid, then you should tear up the loan document so that you shouldn't use it anymore. This loan is not outstanding anymore. But he says, no, don't tear it up either. On the one hand, you can't collect it because there's a receipt that it was paid. But we're not going to rip up the loan document because maybe when the orphans grow up, they'll find some proof and they'll proof that receipt was forged, and then they'll be able to collect. Right now, the orphans are kids, and so they're not going to be capable of figuring this out, but we leave the status quo so that when they get older, they'll be able to sort it out. We don't want to prevent the possibility of them collecting if they rightfully have a loan coming to them. Amar le Rav Acha bere de Rava le Ravina hilchetamai. So Rav Acha son of Rav es Ravina. What's the halacha? Amar le bechuluhu hilcheta ke Rav Chama lebar mitabra tesadeh beshakare la machazikina. It says for all the cases above, we do follow Rav Chama, except for the one about the receipt, because we don't presume that witnesses are liars. Generally, there's witnesses on this receipt that said, we saw this guy paid, right? $1,000 on this date. So witnesses aren't going to sign a document, a receipt, falsely. We assume that it's true. And therefore, we go to the orphans and say, this is already paid. Give us that loan document and we're going to rip it up. Mozutra bered Rav Mari Amar beha na mehelcheta ke Rav Chama timita de tabra me'aliyahu ibaele la pume bechaye abuhon umidela peke shemamina zayufe zayefe. Mozutra, son of Rav Mari, says even in this case we follow the halacha of Rav Chama and we don't rip up the loan document, because if this receipt was valid, then the borrowers should have produced it when the father was alive. When the father was alive, right, presumably he went to try to collect his loan, and the borrower said, I don't know what they said, come back tomorrow, we don't have it yet, I'll pay you next month. But if they had the receipt, they should have produced the receipt and said, we paid it. From the fact that they did not produce the receipt when the father was alive, if it was, and now all of a sudden they found it after the father died, it sounds like there's something fishy going on, and maybe they forged it. They wouldn't forge it in the time of the father, because the father said, I know you didn't pay, and he'd go get witnesses and he'd take them to court. But the orphans, they don't really know if it was paid or not, and so this borrower is trying to take a one-over, take advantage of these orphans. We suspect, right, there's something strange about it. So we're not going to make him pay because he does have a receipt, but you know what? It's very strange that all of a sudden they have this receipt that they didn't have before when the father was alive, and therefore I agree with Rav Chama, leave the loan document in the hands of the orphans. Maybe one day they'll be able to find proof and sort it out. Nu Mishnah, kofin oto livnot bet sha'ar v'delet lechaser. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, lo kol hachasrot reuyot lebet sha'ar. If you have many people that live in a courtyard together, then the residents of that courtyard can force each other to build together a gatehouse and a door for the courtyard. A gatehouse is something like this. This is an elaborate one where if you had a guard, then the guard would stay inside, and that way people that come in have to come in here, and then they would get checked out, and then they would come out the other side, and often it had a door. It might have a door on the inside part or the outside part, so they can have a gatehouse for security, and a door also everybody has to pay up so that they share the cost. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, not all courtyards require a gatehouse. It depends, and the Gemara will explain what it depends on. Furthermore, kofin oto libnot la'ir choma udlatayim uberiach. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omed lo kol ayarot reuyot lechoma. Many people that live in the same city, the residents of that city, can force each other, can raise money, impose a tax to build a wall around the city, as well as a double door and a crossbeam, a lock for the door that they would close off the gate at night, also for protection. However, here also, Rashbag says, not every city requires a wall. There's walled cities and there's unwalled cities. It depends, as the Gemara will explain. Now, how long do you have to live in a city before you're considered a resident that you have to pay this tax? If you live there for 12 months, then that's it. You have to pay in. If you're only there for a short time, just for half a year or so, then you don't have to pay. But if you buy a house there, then immediately you are considered one of the city. So either if you own a house or if you're living there, renting or staying somewhere for 1 year. Is this to mean that a gatehouse is a good thing to have? Is assuming that you can force everyone to pay in to build a gatehouse. That's assuming that it's a good thing because it adds extra security. But there is also a downside to a gatehouse, which is not only does it leave out criminals, it also does not allow poor people to enter. And so this is not a very nice thing to do, to build a gatehouse and a door and all that, and now poor people won't be able to come and ask for food or for money. We have a story of a certain person, a pious man, and Eliyahu HaNavi would regularly come to visit. That's how pious he was. And then one day, he built a gatehouse in his courtyard, and then Eliyahu HaNavi did not come to visit him anymore because he was keeping the poor out. So we have a contradiction. How come the Mishnah says it's good to build a gatehouse, and here, in this story, it's bad? Lakasha ha-migavai ha-mibarai. There's no contradiction. The Mishnah was talking about where the gatehouse is built inside the wall. In other words, the wall is on the outside, and you walk into the gatehouse, and so when you're in the gatehouse, you're already within the courtyard. There's just another entrance, there's another door over here that's keeping him out. But since he's already in, so he can shout to someone and say, hey, I'm a poor person, I'm here, and then they'll hear him and they'll help him out. That's okay. But if the gatehouse is outside of the wall, right, it's built at the rest of the wall is on the inside part of the gatehouse, and so now he can't even enter the courtyard at all, and so even if he screams, no one's going to hear him and no one will help him. That's the case of the story of Eliyahu. Or it could be both of them are talking about where the gatehouse is outside, but there's also no contradiction. One is where there is a door, so now the poor person cannot enter, cannot be heard. There's this big solid door. And the other one was where there's no door, and so that way the poor person will be able to enter. Or maybe both are talking about where there is a door, but one is where there is a handle to open it. That's the case of the Mishnah, so the poor person can always get in. And the story of the Chassid is when there was no handle and it was locked. There was a handle like this. That's also a lock. So that way during the day they could keep it like that, and then at night when they want to lock it, they would just remove this item, and so then no one could get in. And so if nobody can get in, then that's bad, because then the poor person cannot enter. or both are talking about where there is a handle, and one case is where the handle is on the inside and the poor person can't reach it. Only people inside can get out, but the poor person cannot get in. And that's a problem. That's the story of Eliyahu, whereas the Mishnah is talking about where the key is on the outside, and that way the poor person will be able to get in from the outside. It still will be useful to have a doorway there. It'll keep animals out. They can't open it, but humans will be able to, and during the day the humans can come in, and then at night when they want to lock it, there's nobody around, then that will be okay. Now in the courtyard they can all force each other to pay to build a gatehouse and a door. Tanya Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omed Lo kol chaserot ruyot lebet sha'ar ela chaser hasemucha l'reshut harabim reuya lebet sha'ar v'shena semucha l'reshut harabim ena reuya lebet sha'ar. So now we're going to understand Rashbag. In the Mishnah he said that not every courtyard requires a door and a gate. So which ones do and which ones don't? If it's right off the public domain, the main street, then there's lots of people always coming and going, and then you want to keep them out of the courtyard. They want privacy. Then everybody can force each other to build a gatehouse and a door. However, if it's not right off the street, if it's on in a side street, then that's okay, because the public is not walking by there, and so then they'll have privacy even without a gatehouse and a doorway. But Rabbanan, how come Rabbanan say you always need it? Because sometimes when there's really a lot of people in the public thoroughfare, then they push each other, and some people will come into the side streets also, and they'll enter the courtyard. And so for privacy when it's especially busy, then you do need a gatehouse and a door in every courtyard. Now, all the residents of a city can force each other to build a wall around the city and double doors and a crossbar as a lock. So now we have a baraita that expands on the Mishnah. We can force the residents of the city to build a double door and a sidebar. Rashbag says not all cities are the same, that they need a wall. Rather, if it's next to the border of the country where enemies are right nearby, then you have to put a wall. You need walled cities all around the border of the country, because that's where the enemy is going to enter, and so those cities require extra protection. But if it's a city that's in the middle of the country, so that is protected by all the cities that are around, and that will not need a wall. How come Rabbanan say every city needs a wall? Because sometimes it happens that invading armies come and they make their way inside, even past the border into the middle of the country, and so it's a right for all the citizens of every city to force each other to build a wall. So Rabbi Elazar asked Rabbi Yochanan, how much do all the residents of a city have to pay in tax? Do they all pay an equal amount, or does each household pay a different amount? So when we assess it, is it based on the number of people living in each house? You have 2 people living in a house, you pay this much. You have 10 people living in a house, you have to pay 5 times as much. Or do we follow how much income a person has, right? A poor person pays less, a rich person has to pay more. And his answer was, we pay according to a person's worth. And he said, Rabbi Yochanan, a teacher of Rabbi Elazar, says, Elazar, my son, put nails in this halacha, make it fixed, make sure everybody knows it, and so that everybody is in agreement. There's another version of this, where Rabbi Elazar asks Rabbi Yochanan, when they collect this tax, is it based on how close the house is to the wall of the city, right? Because even just like cities in a country, so too houses in a city, the houses that are closer to the wall are more vulnerable to attackers and robbers, and so they should pay more than a house that's in the middle of the city where the robbers aren't going to get all the way there. So do we say the closer you are to the wall, the more you have to pay, or do we follow the net worth of each house? And if you're richer, then you pay more, and poorer, you pay less. And the Yochanan's answer is, it depends how close you are to the wall of the city, and then you have to pay more and put nails in this so that everybody knows it and they don't forget this halacha. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi'ah Emadu Deshura Adrabanan. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi'ah, the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, he made a tax in his city, collected from everybody to pay for a wall, and he even collected from the rabbis. Amar leReshakish Rabbanan la'aserichi netiruta dichtiv esperem mechol yirbun esperem leman ilem alasadikim denefisha mechala hashta kulhu Yisrael ketib behu kachol asher asvatayam sadikim atzmam mechol yirbun. So Resh Lakish objected. Says the rabbis do not require protection because Pasuk in Tehillim says, if I should count them, they are more in number than sand. So count who? Who are we counting here? If you're talking about the counting of the righteous, so the righteous are greater than sand. Well, that can't be, because for all of Israel says that all of Israel will be as many as the sand on the seashore. So if all of Israel is as many as the grains of sand, then the righteous people can't also be the number of the grains in sand. They have to be less. So that can't be what it means. Rather, what this pasuk means, if we count the good deeds of the righteous, they will be more than the greater than the sands of the sea. And now we can make a kavachomer. Sand, which is relatively little compared to the ocean, right? Go look at the beach. The beach is a few feet wide, and yet it can stop the entire ocean from coming and overtaking the land. So if a little bit of sand can stop the entire ocean, so too the good deeds of the righteous, which are even greater than the sand, all the more so protects them, and therefore they don't have to pay in because their Torah and their good deeds protect them. When Resh Lakish came to Rabbi Yochanan, his colleague and teacher, Rabbi Yochanan challenged him. He says, why do you use that pasuk? How come you didn't learn it from the following pasuk, from Shir HaShirim? Ani choma v'shadai kamigdalot. Ani choma zot Torah. V'shadai kamigdalot elu talmidei chachamim. The pasuk says, I am a wall and my breasts are like towers. What is this referring to? It's a mashal, and the wall refers to Torah, and the towers refer to Talmidei Chachamim. That just like in a city, the walls protect, and the towers that are all the way high above, they oversee, and that's the watchtowers that really protect the city. And so too, the Torah protects the whole people, and the sages are the watchmen. They're the guards. So right, you see how that sages are the real protection of a city, and therefore they should not have to pay. Resh Lakish, how come you didn't quote this pasuk? Resh Lakish sabar la kedarash Rava. Ani choma zo Knesset Yisrael v'shadai kamigdalot elu batei knesiyot ubatei midrashot. Resh Lakish, he agrees with Rava. Rava lives later than Resh Lakish. So it happens to be that they have the same interpretation. Resh Lakish was in Eretz Yisrael, Rava was in Bavel. Resh Lakish is the second generation, Rava's fourth generation. But anyway, they say about the same pasuk that the wall, that refers to the people of Israel, and the Shadai Kamigdalot, my breasts are like towers, refers to synagogues and study halls. Those are the towers within a city that protect the city, not the sages themselves, and therefore he did not use this pasuk because, according to him, it's the Bet Midrash, not the sages themselves, that protect the city. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.